Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Maté. Wikileaks founder Julian Assange was supposed to be released this month after serving half of his term for violating bail conditions in Britain. But a British judge recently ruled that Assange must stay behind bars until his next hearing. That's when a British court will weigh whether or not to extradite Assange to the US for charges brought against him under the Espionage Act. Well, to discuss this, I spoke earlier to Kristinn Hrafnsson. He is editor-in-chief of Wikileaks. I began by asking him his reaction to the judge's ruling that Assange must stay in prison.
Well, it came as quite a surprise that the judge would decide to deny him bail without his lawyers even requesting it. And I think that goes to show what kind of prejudices within the UK justice system when it comes to Julian Assange. And it's not for the first time that judges behave in this biased manner, which is quite outrageous. The judge admitted that he was new to the case, he knew nothing of the case, but decided that without the lawyers asking for bail, that he wouldn't get a bail, citing his previous violation, and that he should remain behind bars until trial on remand after he serves his sentence. This, of course, is totally unacceptable if he has to stay in Belmarsh prison, a maximum security prison, until his trial. He has thereby no means of preparing his case. He has been under circumstances which are really straining. He has been pretty much in isolation for the entire time he's been there, spending most of 24 hours in his cell with little exercise. Only a few days ago, he actually could get access to papers pertaining to his case, and the lawyers were allowed to bring it to him and leave it there. So this is the British justice system helping out in making it impossible for Julian to prepare his case properly when it comes into the courtrooms at the end of February.
When is the last time you saw Julian Assange?
I saw him a couple of weeks ago. This was the third time that I've been inside Belmarsh since he was arrested in this despicable manner in the spring. He has had only 2 social visits per month, so I've seen it 3 times. He's still in the health ward. He's in a, shall we say, a relatively stable condition. But you have to take into account, of course, that he's been indoors and in the embassy for all these years, and it has taken a toll. And but the real damage that's being done here now is the fact that you are locking up a publisher, an intellectual, a thinker who has always been very keen on following what's going on in the world. He cannot even follow properly what's going on in his around his own case, which is abhorrent.
And can you tell us more about his current physical and mental state? There were some times at recent hearings when his lawyers said that he was too ill to even appear by video conference before the court.
Yes, there was a time early in the summer that he was really in a bad state. Shortly after, or weeks after, he was incarcerated in Belmarsh prison. His condition has improved somewhat over the time, and little by little, the prison has relaxed, the condition he's under. But for most of the time until now, which is important to note, he has been, according to lawyers who have been serving other inmates in Belmarsh prison who are Category A, we're talking about terrorists and violent criminals. His conditions inside have been more severe than the condition offered to those prisoners.
And looking ahead now, he now faces this trial over whether or not he gets extradited to the US. The Trump administration's Justice Department indicted Assange earlier this year under the Espionage Act, an unprecedented criminal case for a publisher of information. Can you talk to us about what kinds of preparations Assange's legal team is making for this trial?
Well, his legal team is led by Gareth Peirce, who's a very experienced lawyer, and there are other very good lawyers in the legal team. Of course, I cannot go into details of how they will prepare the case. There is no need to show the opposite, the cards that they are holding. But it is a very difficult case, and it's an overwhelming task to prepare for it. We're talking about 175 years in prison if you're found guilty on all all charges. And as you pointed out, this is a precedent being set here, and it has to be stopped by all means, which I'm not too hopeful for under the current government in the UK. It seemed to be serving the interest of the US all the way.
And can you talk about the pressure that is being put on other people as a part of Assange's case? Because it's not just Assange right now who was locked up. We also have Chelsea Manning, the prominent whistleblower, who is still being imprisoned for refusing to testify to the grand jury in Assange's case.
It's absolutely horrible what is being done to Chelsea Manning, and she is very brave in standing up to the system, who is basically deciding to torture her and into playing along in this very dark game, an unfair one. And I would wish to see more outrage in the US in the way she is being treated. She has already served her sentence, which was commuted by President Obama. She has said, I've told you everything I know, and to put her back into prison for denying to testify in front of a secret court, a closed court, is just outrageous. And there are other individuals that are being harassed in one way or another. A young Swede was being held in prison and now is waiting a trial in Ecuador in an obvious attempt by the Ecuadorian authorities acting on behalf of the U.S. government. It's obvious who is pulling the strings there to offer some testimony against Julian Assange, and he is guilty of only one thing, just to be a friend of Julian. So this is the outreach by the Justice Department to other countries, to Ecuador, to the UK, is just simply outrageous, and there are people suffering because of that, not just Julian Assange.
Ola Bini is the man you're referring to, who's faced that case in Ecuador. There's been a real attempt to demonize WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and many in the U.S. media especially have taken part in it. I'm wondering if you could talk about the evolution of WikiLeaks' relationship with the Western media. For a long time, there seemed to be an atmosphere of cooperation, many prominent outlets publishing the documents that WikiLeaks released. But now you see, ongoing attempts to basically smear Assange as a Russia conspirator, as a sympathizer with fascists. I'm wondering if you could talk about your impression of how this campaign has evolved and whether you think it's been successful.
It has obviously been successful up to a point, and the media I just want to point out one thing, that people should actually read the report by Nils Melzer, the special rapporteur on torture at the United Nations, who wrote an extremely damaging report where he said earlier this summer that he had, in his 20 years, he's never seen a similar example of four nations teaming up in basically mobbing a single individual. So this is not just the governments in these countries, it also, and he points out, the media who has taken part in it, and journalists have been complicit in this attempt. They have been manipulated all too easily and all too willingly into helping out in this demonization process. And it's been absolutely, I would say, disgusting for me as a journalist for 30 years to see how journalism has suffered, and especially after 2016, after the US election, where the liberal media, both in the US and the UK, jumped on this bandwagon in going after Julian Assange, and have thrown away all journalistic principles. And so in the general term, we've seen in this case journalism suffer.
Looking ahead to the next hearing that Assange faces, this attempt by the U.S. to extradite him on charges filed under the Espionage Act. We know that Britain is currently ruled by a right-wing government and that its judiciary and top officials have been hostile, to say the least, towards Julian Assange. Despite that, the case that the U.S. is bringing is unprecedented in trying to charge a publisher under the Espionage Act for publishing information. Do you have any assessment of what you think the prospects are of the U.S. succeeding here in getting Assange extradited to the U.S.?
Well, part of the problem, which actually Niels Melzer at the United Nations mentioned in his report, that when he talked about the bias and the basically the mobbing of Julian Assange, is that this bias actually seeps into the entire fabrics of society, and of course judges are influenced by this. We saw this in when Julian was arrested, when a judge that had never seen him before made snarky remarks that he was a narcissist and that he should just agree to the extradition and get his and haul himself over to the US and get it over with. And we saw that in the remarks and the attitude of the judge that sentenced him into almost maximum penalty for breaching bail, which is usually a violation which is closed with a fine. When she walked, and everybody noticed that in the courtroom, walked into the courtroom with actually the ruling ready before she heard the mitigating argument of his defense. So it doesn't give you a high hope of the UK court system in actually treating this case fairly. And the other day, just last week, as I mentioned, a new judge comes to the extradition judge and starts the same sort of procedure, decides to not grant him any bail before even his lawyers had asked for it. This was not supposed to be a bail hearing. This was a technical hearing, which was never supposed to be about bail. So it doesn't really increase your hope that he will get a fairness in the United Kingdom. And as the Niels Melzer pointed out in his report and his comments, that it was impossible for Julian Assange to get a fair trial in the UK, in the US, in Sweden, or in Ecuador.
Kristinn Hrafnsson, Editor-in-Chief of Wikileaks, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.